you so much for having me on today. I am really excited to share about this course. I will give you some honest information here. When Jessica and I were talking about doing this, I have 2 courses this semester, and I was tempted to share my slightly smaller course, which is, I feel like in a lot of ways, because of its size and content, has been a little bit more understandable as much as anything can get. And then I thought, no, that is not what the people want to see. The people want to see the struggle and the mess and the joys that come out of all of that. So that is why I chose my sports social media course. And it's been great, and it's been a major learning experience. So some of you guys have seen this meme, and it's become a very popular meme during what we all now refer to half-jokingly as these challenging times, because we've all sort of been trying to manage this sense of moving in our workspaces and trying to do the things that we're supposed to do as teachers and scholars and just colleagues. But sometimes it does feel like we're this dog with the coffee on the table and the fire around it, trying to just say, okay, we're just going to get through this. So just a little bit about, before I start telling you a little bit about the course, I want to give you this quote that I have just thought about so many times this semester. And anybody who went to college in the 90s probably remembers Indigo Girls. And I was in a band in college in the 90s, so I was a huge fan. And I love this quote from Emily Saliers, that you have to laugh at yourself or you'll cry your eyes out. So true, because when I have been, and many of you have been, learning all these new things, and sometimes the frustration is just super real, and you just want to maybe cry your eyes out, or maybe get frustrated or angry. And I have found, honestly, one of the best things about this semester has been, it has forced me to learn to not take myself quite so seriously and laugh at myself a little bit more and be okay with sometimes openly failing in front of people. And for somebody who tends to be a little bit of a perfectionist, that is no small task. But I think it's also a good reality, because there's so many times in life, even not during a crazy crisis, where we have to learn to sort of fail forward with the people that we are working with. So a little bit about me. I have been a professor since fall of 2009. I started my career at Bradley University in Peoria, Illinois, and then from there went to Clemson University, and I have been there for the past 6 years. Before I became an academic, I had an industry career, mostly in marketing, communications, and PR in sports. As Jessica said, this is my first year at Bishop's. It's my first time living in Canada. I think I maybe could count on one hand even the times I had been to Canada before I moved here. So just new experiences happening everywhere. I am the first tenure line hire in the business and society concentration in sports studies. So kind of have a new role there. This is actually my second time teaching hybrid, but it's my third time where I've been teaching online only. So I came in with a little bit of experience in doing this, although with very different tools and a very different. But this is my first time that I've ever taught online and in person simultaneously. So that has been a new experience with lots of interesting challenges. So a little bit about my course. It's SPO 170, Social Media and Sport. It's the first time this course has been taught at Bishop's, to my knowledge. Maxime can correct me if I'm wrong. It's the second time for me to teach this course. I taught this course in what we call spring semester in the United States, your winter semester. I taught the course in person until, of course, we all went online in March. So I did have a little bit of experience with that transition, but I have 127 students in this class. And that is another reason that I chose this course to talk about, because a lot of times when I have gone online to look for advice on teaching in mode, I will see ideas that are very cool and neat and interesting and totally intended for a class of 25 students. And I have found that sometimes can be a little bit frustrating, because it's like, God, I'd love to do that, but I can't do that. or, just feeling like I would love to do this, but I don't know how to make it manageable. The course is mostly online, obviously at this point. So a lot of the content has been, transferred that way. But in terms of the tools and resources and things like that, a lot of those things have always been online and available to all the students taking it. Most of my students are taking this course online, even though a little less than half of them registered to take it in person, and I'll explain a little bit how that worked. They have mostly transitioned to online even before they had to, and I think there's a lot of realities that are involved with that, and I was totally fine with it, but that's kind of how it's gone. They're mostly first and second year students and mostly sports studies majors and minors, but they do have some other disciplines in their backgrounds as well. So those are some of the background pieces of the course. So this is my classroom. You're also seeing my other classroom, and then my office, of course, is a third classroom, depending on what we have going on. The throne was not included, I must say. I took this picture at the very beginning of the semester, the first time I visited my classroom, and I think Principal Goldblum was about to speak there. I don't know, part of a video or beginning of the semester convocation or something. So yeah, sadly I did not get to keep the throne. But you will see in the first picture that's kind of backed up a bit more, you'll see that this is an auditorium. This is where stage productions and sort of major celebrity kind of guest speakers, musical performances typically happen at Bishop's.
Angela, yeah. Sorry to disturb you, but we're not seeing what you're describing.
So the auditorium picture, you'll notice if you look just to the left of the stage where the throne is, there's like a little tiny stage, and there's like a little podium there, and you'll see in front of it, it's kind of tiny, but there's a little monitor and a microphone, and that is where I taught my class when I was doing the hybrid mode before we transferred online. So I would go and I could speak from there, and you can't see it in this picture, but there would be a screen behind me that would show basically anything I was showing on my screen, PowerPoint presentations, etc. And then the students were sitting in the auditorium up to, I think the auditorium typically holds 600 students, and up to 60 could be in there for class. And it was usually somewhere between, I'll be honest, somewhere between 5 and 30 students might be in there, just depending on the day. And so they were spaced apart. You can probably see a little bit of plastic on the seats that help to separate the students from each other. So basically what would happen in my class, we meet twice a week, but when we were meeting in this form, the ones who had registered for the in-person section could attend in class or online. The ones who had attended online or registered for the online only section could only attend online. And so I would teach the students simultaneously. So the students online would log into Teams, and so the course would basically be broadcast on Teams at the same time that it was being taught to the students in class. So my goal for the semester when I was preparing this course was to try to integrate the experience as much as possible so that the students online and in person wouldn't be getting two totally separate experiences beyond the fact that, their logistics are what they are. So basically what I did is in this class, the teaching involved, obviously there's a lecture portion of it. I would use PowerPoint presentations to go through course material. We would have discussion and activities. So sometimes these were like just, me building in discussion to the course itself, like covering the material, asking the students questions, which they could answer either in the chat or out loud. And then other times they actually had breakout discussions where they would talk amongst themselves and then come back and share what they had discussed with classmates. This course also involved a number of guest speakers from the industry who, what we would do when we would have a guest speaker is we would all be online because most of the speakers would, sorry? Okay, sorry, background stuff. So most of the speakers were coming from the United States. A lot of them were my former students who are working in the industry now. But we also had Claire Webb and Marty Rook from the athletics department come to class and speak. And Claire also gave another presentation on another day talking about an event that she had put on. And so we kind of were able to bring a little bit of in-person element with them coming to class as well. So as I mentioned, this was hosted on Teams. I had a student chat monitor that was super helpful, that basically each class there would be a student who, for a little bit of extra credit, would be responsible for monitoring the chat for questions, problems, issues, and then they could ask those questions out loud in class to me, and that way I wasn't trying to scroll through the chat while at the same time trying to manage conversation. All of my classes are recorded and they have been posted on Moodle, so students who couldn't attend class could go back and listen if they would like to. Okay, so, oops. There we go. Okay, so general course organization logistics. We use Teams for course meetings. The students have a group project, so their project groups are also on Teams. And then they also have discussion groups that are also on Teams. And I set up those groups using Moodle. And when I say I set them up, I mean I just used Moodle to put the students in random groups. I was not the one who put them on Teams, though. Muna Abdallah is amazing, and she was the one responsible for making sure that the students actually got into their groups on Teams so that they could talk with each other. And we'll talk about how amazing my OLTC team is a little bit later, so stay tuned. Office hours also generally took place over Teams when we were still allowed to meet with students in an appropriate socially distanced manner. I did have a couple of students take advantage of that, but mostly it was Teams for office hours too. And then just general communication. Every so often I would send them a note or they would send me a note on Teams. Microsoft Stream hosts my recording of classes. I use Moodle a lot. Moodle has been a great organizational tool. I feel like I'm getting better and better at it, which is great because I like the way that it organizes things and keeps things in places where students can easily find them. So course outline, assignments, resources, grades, all of that. Basically, I'm constantly pointing them to Moodle to find the things that they need. There's also an office hours scheduler there, which has been helpful too once I figured out how to set it up. Email, I use email a good bit for individual communication. So students who have questions, even though they can send me a note through Teams or through Moodle, they generally send me emails. So that's typically how I've handled a lot of that communication that doesn't take place on camera. And then I have been trying to introduce my students, especially since it's a social media class, to engaging on social using a class hashtag. I've used this in other classes in the past. And one thing that's been a little bit of a challenge with this is I didn't realize before coming here that Twitter is not super popular among my students. And so I've only had a few students kind of look at this and take advantage of this, but I'm thinking now actively about how I can maybe add this to other platforms or, do other things to get students on Twitter in the future. So all that planning months in advance and weeks in advance, and then we finally get to day one. This is me on the first day of class, and that's how I look on the outside, but how I'm feeling on the inside was more like the little dog. I'm pretty sure that I cried about 5 minutes before this picture was taken, just because I was nervous about how everything was going to go, and I just didn't want to fail. And I'm sure we've all had that feeling of just, wanting to get it right and not be a distraction and let the learning and class take place. So here I was.
I'm sorry.
Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt. We're still on the general hybrid teaching logistics slide. If you just switched it might take a second because of the lag, but just to let you know.
Okay, all right. Yeah, I think that's going to just happen because of the images in the slide. I think they probably are loading kind of slow. So sorry about that. Hopefully some of the other slides will load a little bit faster, but the picture is of me standing by my car with my lunch, looking very much like I am going to perhaps first grade. And and then of course the other picture is the same picture from the first page of the PowerPoint, which is the little dog dog with the coffee, with a fire around it saying this is fine. So, and I think that's one of the things, honestly, I have to say, I often tell my students that I'm really grateful that I have a background in music and theater because it has taught me how to project calmness, even though what I am feeling is 100% not that sometimes. So if you ever, are looking for ways to sort of tell your students about why it's a good idea to take that acting class, even though that's not your major. Like that's something you can keep in mind. So very much for that. Okay, so this is the things that worked mostly well slide. And so I say mostly well because they weren't perfect, and I'm not going to pretend that they weren't, but I will tell you what worked well and maybe what could have been better. So the chat monitors, this was so helpful, and next semester I will start out the semester as soon as possible with chat monitors. I opened the opportunity to all students who wanted to participate. I asked them to let me know if they could do it, and then with the students who responded, I set up a schedule that they approved, and it was really helpful. And what was nice too is that it was actually a way for me, since I came in here knowing like 5 people, it was a great way for me to get to know the students, just little by little, because I started putting names with faces. All my chat monitors were in person in class, and that I think is pretty much essential because it makes it easier for them to flag me down and things like that. So that has worked great. I would definitely do that again. Teams has worked really well for guest speakers. I have had some issues occasionally with screen sharing, and that seems to be a common experience. One thing I thought that was not good that has ended up actually being okay is that my guests can't see, because they're from outside bishops, they cannot see the chat. But what I found actually works really well is that I end up being the chat monitor, and I've asked my students if they will thumbs up or heart or like the questions from the other students that they are most interested in hearing responses to. And that has helped me in this giant class to be able to sort of filter through what are the questions that are the most important to ask this guest speaker at this time. I also offered extra credit for guest speaker questions, just like not a lot, like 10 points extra credit on their credit for just participating in the session, but it was enough, and I got great questions from students, so I would definitely do that again. It doesn't take much, just a little bit, and it's a huge incentive. The office hours scheduler has worked mostly well. User error, because I didn't really know how to do it at the beginning of the semester. It took longer to get up and running, but next semester I'll start right away. And so I think that's a good way of helping the students and not having to have quite as many emails go back and forth. Moodle organization has worked pretty well. I feel like they've been able to find what they've needed. There are some things that I thought I would use that I didn't. And I, over the break, will have to think about whether I want to use those things or whether I want to not worry about those things. But that organization of just, having their assignments in the calendar, having everything they need there overall has helped them and has helped me, I think. And then the challenge assignment. So this is one of the most fun parts of this class that I was super worried was not going to work, largely because of the number of students we have, but has ended up, I think, being mostly okay. Challenge assignments are typically when we have a guest speaker, we will do this kind of thing where the speaker, so let's say, for example, when Claire and Marty came to class, we were talking about social media policies. So they gave the students a challenge in groups to basically come up with a social media policy for Bishop's athletics, and it had to include certain things, and they had a limited amount of time to work on it. So they got, I think, maybe one class day that they had to work on it and turn it in, and then Claire and Marty came to the next class after receiving the responses from the students that they had looked at, and they were able to comment on the responses, ask the students questions about it. And while the students didn't maybe engage with questions and comments as easily as we thought that they might in that discussion, the assignments they turned in were quite good, and they had really put some thought into it. So that was helpful. Another challenge assignment we did was the Reels challenge, which is where Claire actually asked the students if they would come up with ideas for bishops to use Instagram Reels, which is a new feature on that platform. And so the students in their small groups had to meet and come up with I think they had to come up with 3 ideas. They had to make one of them and then also give their reasoning behind how they made it and why they thought those ideas would be effective. And those were great. Like, they did a really good job with it. And again, short time frame to work on, much like you would have in the real world, but some neat assignments. And then Claire was able to come to class and talk about some of the pros and cons with what they had chosen to do. But again, it gives them a chance to kind of engage with things. So I would definitely keep doing those, and I was super happy that that they ended up being something workable with a large class to do in small groups. Things that were a struggle. So there were definitely things that were a struggle, and it doesn't mean that they were a complete failure. It just means that they were a struggle. The biggest issue with the classroom that I had is really as much related to COVID protocol as it is with the space itself. And the biggest problem was that students online could not hear the students in class when they would ask questions, which meant that I had to listen very, very carefully to the student responses and questions in class, repeat them as verbatim as I could remember, and then answer them. And that was hard, I'll be honest with you. That was really difficult. And not because I don't listen actively to my students, but I learned that it's very different to listen actively and listen trying to memorize what someone is trying to say. Now, that problem could have been solved very easily in non-COVID times by simply passing a microphone around. Guess what we can't do during COVID? Pass things around for everyone to touch. So that was clearly not going to happen. So that was probably one of the biggest challenges of the space. The other challenge of the space too, but honestly, I mean, this, unless you were in a very small classroom, this would be the case, is that, you can't just have students turn around and talk to their neighbor, because they have so much space in between them, and they naturally like to sit kind of in different spots too. So I could not rely on using those kinds of discussion tactics. The good news, though, was that everybody in class and not was able to get on Teams and chat with their discussion groups, including in class, when we had those times where we would have those breakout conversations. So that worked well. So just something to be aware of. And it was, like I said, a struggle, but not a failure. The project and discussion groups, again, a struggle, but not a failure. I was super terrified about this when I saw exactly how many groups that there were to have to manage. And then, unfortunately, my other course also used these too, but in one class, the letter was the project group and the number was the discussion group, and the other class, it was vice versa. And that ended up being really confusing for the students and me. So I would for sure make those the same next time. So that was number one. Number two was I did not make it clear enough at the beginning of the semester regarding the project groups, the semester project groups, that your group is your group unless you talk to me about it. In other words, you can't just change to another group. I didn't anticipate that being an issue, but it ended up becoming a big problem when all of a sudden I started, like halfway through, getting these emails about missing group members. And at first I thought it was just technological problems. As it turned out, there was a few students who had kind of gotten lost and ended up in the wrong group. There was that. And then there was this one group of guys that had worked together in their discussion group, really liked working together, and decided, let's just do our project together. And then, forgot to tell me about it. So all of them, they were from 5 different groups. So hours of time on my part to try to fix and remedy this situation. So for sure that is going to be a part of my planning for next semester. The good news is we all worked it out and everybody moved on, and by and large those groups have worked out pretty well. And then the final thing, of course, is just technology challenges. I have really had to get used to learning super quickly and failing often in front of people, and that has been emotional, frankly. And I think in a way, like I mentioned before, I think it's been good for me. But at the same time, it certainly does lend itself to some exhaustion. So I'm very grateful for the OLTC team and our ITS folks, because they have been there pretty quickly when I've had questions or needed help with something. In addition, the guys that were the techs in the Centennial space were also really helpful, Bruce and Benoit, just to try to like work together to make things work as well as possible. And sometimes you just had to know that it was just not going to be perfect that day, and you figure out a solution, which again is a good learning experience for the students too, because a lot of times that's just what you have to do in the real world. So, survival tactics. Okay, so the OLTCs, I cannot say enough good things about the OLTCs. When I was in quarantine after we immigrated here, I got to know my OLTCs, and they helped onboard me to all the major technology that I was going to need to know about, almost none of which I had ever used before. And I honestly don't know what I would have done without them. So they've been great, not only before the semester began, but as I've had questions over the course of the semester. I have a fantastic marker. Claire's so much more than a marker. She's just amazing. Claire Webb is basically the social media director for Bishop's Athletics, and she has been great in terms of helping me sort of think through some problems and issues that we've had going over the course of the semester. She's a former student, so she understands Bishop's students and the culture, and has really been great at helping me think through some things or figure out how to do things. So I'm super grateful for that. Communication, just constant communication with everyone, letting everybody know what's going on, being as clear about expectations with the students and everyone else up front is essential. ITS videos, definitely huge. So grateful that Scott and Sean and everybody else there made those videos and put them up on Moodle for us to access whenever we need them, because I've relied on those to solve some problems when I didn't have a lot of time to solve those problems. Looking online for course ideas. I highly recommend, if you've got a large class, you specifically look for ideas for large classes, because if you don't, you're going to get a lot of stuff for smaller courses that just frankly either won't work or will just make you feel sad because you can't do it. So ideas for large classes, I definitely found some things that were helpful. And sometimes you'll read through an article and you'll find only one tiny thing that you can use, but maybe that tiny thing is what makes a big difference. That's why I decided to start using chat monitors, because I read through this whole long article about giant classes, and then at the end of it, I was like, you know what? The one thing I got out of this was I need to do chat monitors, and that worked great. So it's worth taking a little time to look at those things. I ended up allowing my students some extra time during class to do some of their group work for their projects and for their challenge assignments. And while, the downside of that, of course, is it takes away from class time. But, they need that space sometimes, and especially for students that have been just trying to juggle so much, it helps if they have a time that they know that they can get together with everybody. So I've ended up working a couple more sessions during class into their work schedule just to help them manage these things. And the result has been, I think, better work, better projects, better communication. I've had to let go of a lot of stuff. And I think that's just sort of what we've all kind of probably had to deal with this semester. But there were a lot of ideas and things that I had done in my previous time that I taught this class that I just had to say goodbye to this semester. And that was hard, but it was so worth it, because trying to do too much, I think, would have been bad for me, but also for the students in terms of the quality of their learning experience. And again, lots of laughing. Laughing needs to happen. Laughing at yourself, laughing with your students, letting your students laugh at you and being okay with it. Laughing. Again, Emily Salyers is so right. Like, you know, that is a good way sometimes to deal with the fact that, you know, you're experiencing some, you know, frankly, humiliation to some degree when you're not perfect at the technology and when things don't work quite right and you really wanted them to. So that has been really helpful too. So that is basically my presentation. So my dad worked in the retail fabric industry for most of his career, and he, to this day, still answers every call. This is Larry. How can I help you? So how can I help you is my question for you guys. Do you want to see my Moodle site? Do you have questions about Teams? Do you want me to share stories, examples, like whatever is helpful?